Hello and welcome to another episode of May Contain Traces of Soy, the podcast all about surviving and thriving on a plant-based, low-waste lifestyle. I am your host, Rochelle, and if you're new around here, hello, welcome to the podcast. Really psyched to have you listening today. If you're a regular listener, welcome back, soybeans. So glad that you guys keep coming back each week to check out the podcast. I really appreciate it. If you are new around here, you won't know this, but we do shout outs on this show. So that's something where you, the listener, can get in touch with us and you can suggest topics that you would like covered or questions that you want answered, and we'll do a shout out for you on the next show. You can hit us up on Instagram. We are May Contain Traces of Soy, or on Facebook. And if you are enjoying the show and you would like to boost us and support us a little bit, you can share a screenshot of yourself listening to today's episode to socials and tag us at Make a 10 Traces of Soy. We'll definitely share it to our account. Or you can head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating or review. That really helps to push the podcast up there so that more people see it and hopefully spread that non-judgmental vegan message. All right, guys, totally psyched to have you guys on board for today's episode. I have Daniel joining me again, my partner, Daniel Johnson. Say howdy.
Hello, how's it going?
That's good. I'm glad that you're here. We wanted to talk about something today because we were discussing this just between the two of us the other day, and I was like, this is an interesting episode for people to hear about. And I think it's something that a lot of people will be interested in, especially people who maybe are not vegan or they are plant-based or they are thinking about going vegan. So yeah, this is a really interesting topic because it is a bit of a gray area. So today we're going to be talking about whether or not a vegan can ethically go to a zoo. Now, the reason why there is so much controversy around zoos, I mean, it's because, you know, you've got animals in captivity. That's obviously an issue. But it's more broadly sort of talking about the complex issues with some of those zoos and with some of those aquariums and places where they're, you know, hanging on to exotic animals, they're not caring for them properly, that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into that today, and we're going to discuss all the gray areas around conservation that different zoos do and the role that they might have to play in this larger narrative and this larger non-vegan world that we live in and those kinds of issues. So we're going to get into all of that today. But I'm really psyched to have Daniel here with me for this podcast. We're actually having a glass of Devil's Corner Sauv Blanc, which is a vegan wine. If you haven't checked them out, definitely try it out. We love a Devil's Corner, don't we, babe?
Yeah, it's a good Tassie wine. And yeah, doesn't hurt to be a little bit parochial.
That's it. So yeah, we're going to be talking about the zoo issue today. Now, let's start off firstly talking about the actual definition of veganism according to the Vegan Society. So the definition of veganism according to the Vegan Society is a philosophy and way of living that seeks to exclude, as far as practical and possible, the exploitation of animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. So on face value, you can see quite logically that it would not be a vegan ethical choice to attend and support a zoo, because zoos are exploiting animals for entertainment and for profit. But this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, because we don't live in a entirely vegan world, and we've come in, and with our speciesism and with, you know, with our whole approach to the world and to society, what humans have done is basically made it impossible for some of these species to survive without human support and without human interference. So without the conservation efforts of some of these zoos, especially around trying to prevent the extinction of, you know, critically endangered species, we might not have some of these animals in the world anymore. And that's what makes this a gray area, because I feel as though there was a time, only a few years ago, but definitely going back to, you know, sort of like the Victorian era of menageries and places like that. Menageries, yeah. All of those kinds of places and pleasure gardens and zoos and stuff, where it was these animals, these exotic animals that weren't from this climate, being put into these cages and not being properly looked after. But the way that zoos operate now, especially here in Australia, and I can't say all of them, but like some of them for sure, is so much more focused on that conservation and on the welfare of the animals that they have there. So it's a little bit more complicated because it's not so cut and dry anymore. Daniel, what are your feelings about this?
Well, for the most part, especially zoos that have a good conservation record and the proprietors are doing it for the right reasons. They're not doing it to... I mean, the prime example I could pull out is Tasmania Zoo down here, not far from us, in just outside of Launceston. And, I mean, they've been struggling since COVID hit, and they are part of breeding programs. They actually, when I was working at my last job, got to go out there and meet a couple of giraffes that have moved down here, and the way they keep them, they live in a heated environment, and they're part of breeding programs. A lot of the animals they've got there, for example, they've got an African painted dog there that's part of a breeding program, and apparently there are only 7,000 of those left, and they've got Tasmanian devils there that and I think they might be part of a breeding program with them as well. And as probably a lot of people might know, they've got the facial tumor disease, that the Tasmanian devils. So I think without places like that are doing it for the right reasons, then the longevity of some of these animals, they might not be there in a few years' time. And I mean, that's sad in itself. But I think in Australia, it's not like Joe Exotic or something where there's these, where people are really doing it for entertainment, as you say.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think, is it entertainment or is it just for people to observe? And it's, you're not going to get to see these animals in
Sure, I'm hearing what you're saying about that, but, you make the point that you think in Australia we do it less for entertainment and we're a little bit more appropriate in the way that we handle animals, and, it's less of that kind of performance thing. But places like SeaWorld in Australia are still pretty fucking bad, aren't they? I mean, like SeaWorld here, they have the dolphin shows, they that's very much performance. They let people pat the dolphins. Also not something we should really be doing. It's complicated though, because these animals have been bred in captivity, and because, you can't release an animal that's been bred in captivity into the wild again. That's not going to work.
Well, also in the case of SeaWorld on the Gold Coast here, look, I've been there, especially as a kid. I went there a bit, I suppose, because we didn't live too far from there, and lived in Brisbane, and it was somewhere we'd probably go once every year or two as a kid.
Yeah.
But that's also a grey area because, look, on as you say, the fact that they're making dolphins jump through, hoops.
Literal hoops, yeah.
Yeah, quite literally jump through hoops. Sure, and they're living in pools and whatnot. But, I mean, I don't think it's to the same degree as some of the water... some of the large aquariums in other parts of the world, but I guess I don't really know that much to make a judgment one way or the other on the quality of SeaWorld here.
Specifically on SeaWorld, yeah.
I'm not going to sit there and say them without having a full knowledge of their practices there. But something I do know is that Trevor Long, who's I think their chief marine biologist, they also. And I guess this is where it gets a bit tricky as well. Like, they have such an infrastructure there with a lot of vets and really qualified people. And so if there are migrating whales that get caught in shark nets off the Gold Coast...
They can help them.
They often go out there and help them. And they're there to, if animals get struck by boat propellers or they're damaged, they've got large wildlife hospitals and they do rehabilitate them and then... release them again. And the same goes for Australia's zoo on the Sunshine Coast, the one that Steve Irwin made famous, the Irwin family's zoo. They've got a large wildlife hospital where they look after a lot of koalas, and I guess without those institutions being there, without the zoos or the they are there as tourist attractions as well. But if they weren't there, would a lot of those animals that are getting struck by cars and or boats or whatnot perhaps not have that expert veterinary
skill around to help them. Yes.
Yes.
It's
so,
a very
I
good
don't know.
point. It's complicated though because it's one of these things where, unfortunately, for there to be the existence of a collection of specialists and veterinary hospitals where they can assist wildlife, where they can do more complicated things like that, like saving whales who are getting caught in fishing nets and, dealing with and saving and supporting local wildlife, it does need to make money. That's the hard part as well, is that these organizations do need to have a profit. Otherwise, there's no way, like, you need a business model. You can't just be doing it for nothing. And it attracts the high-end talent because it has the dollars to pay it. And I would say that if you are, a specialist veterinary scientist, you would think that you care a lot about animals. But, I mean, the thing is, there's a difference of ethical opinions with a lot of people who work in these areas, because obviously, as vegans, we don't think that it's ethical to use animals for things, to eat animals, for example, to use their, skin for clothing. But there's a lot of vets who do still eat animals. They do still eat meat. They do still do this. So
I don't think it's the animals did that.
No, it's not.
They're not like, oh, look.
Oh, this one didn't quite make it. Fire up the grill. No, it's not like that.
Guess I'm having turtle soup for dinner tonight. Yeah, no, I don't think that's
dude, that is not what I was saying, right. And you know it. But yeah, it is a little bit more complicated because there's a difference of ethics. But it is a complicated ethical quandary. One of the things that people often say in support of zoos on the side of like vegan arguments is that they are a place of education and conservation efforts. And without, that education, you don't see people exposed to animals, understanding why we need to be worried about the environment and what's happening in endangered species and all this kind of thing. But at the same time, there are a lot of organizations, animal rights organizations, PETA, for example, that feels that this is basically the conservation stuff is a bit of a con, because they're really, like, they profit quite heavily off of the zoos. Obviously, the zoos do very, very well. It's not as though they're broke or anything.
I don't know that that's necessarily the case. So the example I used before of the Tasmania zoo.
Yeah, but you're talking about a tiny little zoo. Like
it's a reasonable size zoo, but I mean they were hit really hard when COVID happened, and they were crowdfunding for to meet their food bills and everything. And the enclosures they have there, they are really spacious. They seem really well looked after, and they have so many animals that are part of breeding programs that. And I mean, to my knowledge, a lot of Australian zoos seem to operate that way.
I think Australian zoos are different to overseas zoos, partially because we actually have a governing body here that makes sure that those zoos meet certain requirements. So in Australia and New Zealand, there is something called the Zoo and Aquarium Association accreditation. And it basically ensures that zoos and aquariums go through a process to be given accreditation for meeting certain standards, and that's for biodiversity, for conservation, for sustainability, but also for animal welfare, including nutrition, health, environment, behavior, and mental state, which is really important, obviously, because one of the things that they used to see in the zoos over in America, especially the more harsh ones where they weren't given enough room and stuff like that, like earlier on in the lifetime of zoos, was these animals just sort of going mad and rocking back and forth in place in their cages because they're not meant to be in such a small space, and they go insane from it, basically. Like, animals do have serious mental health struggles as a result of being in zoos. So it's great that we have a governing body that actually does look into this and regulate it. But at the same time, that accreditation lasts 3 years, which means that they only need to make sure that they're meeting all the standards, when that 3-year mark comes around. And you can't be sure that they're keeping up those standards in the interim between. So that's, another thing to be considered. But yeah, I feel as though zoos would not have gotten better had it not been for organizations like PETA and animal rights organizations pushing them so hard to do the right thing by animals. So as much as I don't agree completely with a lot of what PETA does,
I was gonna say, yeah,
if you don't have that level of extremity, because they need to, it's a negotiation, isn't it? They need to say, we want all animals freed and left alone, and then the negotiation is, well, then we'll give them this minimum amount of comfort and care for their well-being, because you have to kind of meet in the middle on things. So if they didn't ask for more extreme action, we wouldn't get the action that we have had that has led to change and reform for the way that zoos are handling animals in conservation. I feel as though in Australia we are fortunate and we do have zoos that perhaps do a little bit better than some of the zoos overseas. But even now, like in Launceston, I think it's a bit strange that we still have over at the Gorge all of these peacocks, because when they came down here and they established Launceston, they created a pleasure garden in, where the Gorge is, and they made these beautiful little structures and things, and they also brought over a bunch of peacocks, and they were like, yep, this is important, we've got to have these here. It's a weird thing that they've done that, and it's a holdover from a different time where, the speciesism of human beings was so rampant, they didn't care at all about the well-being of the animals around them. They were purely for their own entertainment. And we are past that to a degree now, in that people do try and do a bare minimum to do the right thing by animals.
Yeah, those peacocks, they seem pretty, I don't know, they don't seem like they're struggling at all, and they're thriving up there. I don't know. Yeah, it's weird that they're there. Like, it's definitely not their natural habitat.
No.
Like, they're sort of hanging out with these, like, gigantic possums that seem to have, that don't really have many bigger predators here by the look of them, because, I don't know, they're larger than cats down here for some reason. And there's, wallabies and these strange little native hen things. I don't know, they seem to be called turbo chickens by a lot of people. I don't know what they're actually... I probably should have done some research, but it is very strange seeing these peacocks existing alongside all those animals. But look, those... I don't know how many generations back the peacocks go, or if these ones are direct descendants of the original peacocks that were brought to Cataract Gorge, but they are not... They're not caged or anything. They're not in captivity. They seem pretty... They seem pretty happy at the Gorge, so I don't really... I can't really...
Can't really fault the situation with the peacocks there.
Well, I don't know. I can't really interview them to ask them what their thoughts are, and I don't know if they know any better, but, I mean, they don't seem perturbed by humans. There's plenty of foods and things that they seem to eat, and they just... I don't know. They seem to pretty much run the show up there, really. They...
Yeah, they do seem to do pretty well up there. It's an interesting and difficult kind of ethical question, because I think for a lot of vegans that are quite, passionate and quite far into their journey of veganism, the answer is a 100% resounding no. They're not all right with zoos. They would never visit a zoo. And then for some vegans, the answer is, depending on the zoo, maybe they would. Maybe they would go and visit one. I don't know. It's complicated. It's kind of a gray area for me. I think that there is stuff that these zoos are doing that I don't think we would have the funding or the organization or effort put into place were it not for the existence of the zoos. So to give you an example of this, at Taronga Zoo, they have bred and released more than 50,000 animals into the wild. So they are doing breeding programs in order to save species that are close to extinct. And they're actually committed to protecting 10 critically endangered species from extinction over the next 10 years. Interestingly, Zoos Victoria, so that's the state of Victoria in Australia, Zoos Victoria and now has the tagline, I think it's something like committing to ending... saving from extinction, basically. And their whole thing is about trying to save as many species from extinction as possible. They are protecting 27 critically endangered species over the next 10 years. They've committed to try and keeping 27 critically endangered species alive. Now, as much as I think that we do need more of these places that are, more like our animal sanctuaries where we can support and look after animals that need that support, those places run on a shoestring. They don't have, the resources that zoos do, and they definitely don't have the access to research and to, do this kind of work, this sort of conservation work, protecting critically endangered species. And we are not seeing that need being fulfilled by any other sector. That without the financial incentive, I think that we would just have a lot of species just dying out if it wasn't for these zoos doing this. So I feel as though the gray area that is zoos is partly a result of we live in this non-vegan world. It's not like the world is vegan. We have created a world where these animals are almost extinct, and without human intervention, we would just be losing, like animals would just be dying. So if you care about animals not going extinct, you kind of have to, just let the zoos do that. I mean, who else is going to do it, you know?
What about the monkeys in Launceston? What are your thoughts on the
Oh,
monkeys?
man. Okay, so we should explain for the listeners, because a lot of people will not know this, because Launceston's in the middle of nowhere, and it's like,
It's the second biggest city in Tasmania.
Yeah, but in Tasmania. Yeah. And I have listeners, a lot of them are overseas, in Europe, in Belgium, in America. There's like most of my listeners.
Okay, so for those that don't know,
we're living in Launceston, Tasmania. It's the second biggest city in Tasmania in Australia. So Tasmania is the tiny little island off the edge of Australia.
It's not off the edge, it's down the bottom. It's
down the bottom.
Often left off maps.
Yes, often forgotten. And it's actually where they had the Tasmanian tiger, who died in captivity as a result of them not thinking about his warmth and his comfort. And he was exposed to the elements. He wasn't put inside for the night, and he died in the 1930s in Tasmania Zoo. So
that wasn't in Tasmania Zoo, was it?
Yes, it was.
Oh.
Yeah. So we are responsible. The zoos down here are responsible for the death of one of the most famous animals in the world, the Tasmanian tiger. But yes, we're in Launceston in Tasmania, and there is a park here, the city park. Has this enclosure with monkeys.
I just want so that was a zoo down here. It was what was called a zoo in the 1930s in Hobart. And just to be clear,
it's not Australia Zoo. It's not
Tasmania Zoo, the one that I was referring to.
No, obviously not that zoo.
No, I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, in the 1930s, I don't think the zoo you're talking about existed as it is now.
No, but
so
I just wanted to.
Yeah.
They seem like a good zoo, and the lady. The woman who now runs the zoo, Rochelle Penny.
Her name's Rochelle?
Her name's Rochelle.
Guys, I don't like this. No one else is allowed to have my name.
She seems really nice and like just someone who loves animals. And she definitely wasn't. I'm not entirely sure of her age, but she definitely wasn't around in 1936 when the.
Yeah. Well, basically, we'll get back to explaining about the monkeys now. So. In City Park down here, there is an enclosure where there is a collection of monkeys. Do you know what kind of monkeys they are? I know that I've obviously seen.
How do you pronounce it? They're just macaque.
Oh, Macquarie.
MACAQUE.
Macaque. Yeah, we'll look it up, guys.
That's how you spell it. I don't know how you pronounce it, though.
Yeah, so there is this type of monkeys that are from Japan, and there is a sister city to Launceston in Japan, and these monkeys were gifted to them. So there's this collection of monkeys that live and have lived for many, many years.
More than 40 years, actually.
More than 40 years. They breed and, just keep living there in this enclosure, and they have a little area where they can go to at night and stuff. But the whole thing was designed quite a long time ago, and I don't know whether or not you would consider it by today's standards to be enough room or, a reasonable and healthy living environment for them. It's weird, and it's very, very much, it kind of harkens back to the older days of zoos where they have this enclosure, but it is definitely not large enough, for the number of monkeys there. And you can just kind of walk along and look at them, and it's like, well, this all seems a bit odd. I mean, I haven't done much research into what those sort of monkeys require and things, but it rubs me the wrong way. I have to say, I don't think that that's a very ethical situation for those captive monkeys.
Do you know that the monkeys, side note here, the monkeys were nearly put down about a bit over 20 years ago now.
Oh my God, why?
Because I think apparently of the monkeys that came over from Japan, a reasonable proportion of them were infected with herpes B, apparently, and in 2000 they were very nearly all euthanized because
oh my God.
Yeah, I think if it's passed on to humans, it can be fatal, but it's actually pretty benign in the monkeys apparently. But they were really thinking about putting the monkeys down.
Ooh.
But look, the monkeys they seem to be thriving now.
Yeah, hashtag thriving.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. There you go. There's
Yeah, it's a weird experience going to see the monkeys here. You don't have to pay or anything. They just exist in this little enclosure in the park. You can literally just walk through and have a look. There's not a lot of room. And you just kind of like wander past. It's very, very odd. I don't know of any other city in Australia that has just a monkey enclosure in the middle of its city park. Or any other kind of animal enclosure other than actual zoos. It's weird. I've not seen it done before.
No,
Maybe it's something that's done overseas. You
kind
of like it. Daniel kind of likes the monkeys.
Yeah, if ever I'm walking through the park, I'll go and say good day to the monkeys.
There's actually a sign on the monkey enclosure that says, you know, if you lose anything in the enclosure, the staff are not responsible for it and they won't be getting it back for you, which makes us kind of wonder, what have the monkeys done with things that have fallen into the enclosure, and like, do they get angry if you try and take it back from them?
It's their iPhone 7 now.
Exactly.
Well, it's probably the fact that, you know, maybe the keepers stay within a decent arm's length of them because of the whole them being disease ridden. Maybe that's a large part of it.
Maybe that is a large part of it. But yeah, the whole situation with the monkeys is interesting. Getting back on track to talking about zoos, I was just going to say that there, obviously, if you enjoy seeing animals, and who doesn't enjoy seeing animals? I'm not saying that I don't like going to zoos, or I didn't used to like going to zoos when I was younger and stuff and wasn't vegan. I definitely love seeing animals. I love interacting with animals. I think most people do. And being able to have a close interaction with animals like that can be very good for people who, you know, are, I guess, people who are not yet vegan or who haven't confronted and thought through some of their own personal cognitive biases about, you know, and cognitive dissonance about what it is to eat meat, what it is to support industries that hurt animals. So in that way, I think that and education that they do in a lot of those zoos, where they explain the different types of animals and what's going wrong in the world for them, why we need to put more money towards conservation efforts, things like that. All of that has a place in the world, and I think that it is important. But if you do want to see animals and you want to support organizations that are a little bit more ethical, you can look into going to see some of the animal sanctuaries. There are a lot of them around Australia, and you can usually, they'll have rules for it, but you can usually pay a donation to come and visit at the animal sanctuary. They'll just have different rules about how the animals interact and behave and what you should and shouldn't do. They won't sort of let you do anything that's going to not be good for the animals. So, you know, there won't be any holding of koalas, there won't be any patting of dolphins. This is stuff that we really shouldn't be doing anyway. And I think it's great that those sanctuaries exist, but like I was saying, they do not have the bankroll to attract the kind of talent or to support some of the more important research and conservation efforts that the bigger zoos do.
It's interesting you say that, because I can think, I won't name them, but of at least a couple of places that are called sanctuary, like it's actually in their name, that do let you hold koalas.
Well, I mean, those aren't real sanctuaries. I'm talking about actual, like, you know, you surrender animals here, like those sorts of animal sanctuaries. I'm going to include a list in the show notes, guys, so you'll be able to go check that out. And this list actually came from, I think it was the PETA website. But yeah, I will have some interesting bits and pieces you'll be able to check out in today's show notes in regards to some of the statistics that have been pulled here. And yes, some other stuff to go and look at if you are interested in exploring this grey area issue a little bit more. Now, I may get quite a bit of hate for this episode. We shall see. We shall see what happens on social media. I'm fortunate in that a lot of people who follow me are either not yet vegan or they are plant-based. So a lot of people are at the beginning of their journey, and I get less kind of angry vegan responses from other vegans. And do not do not worry. It is something that definitely happens. Don't think that just being vegan protects you from that. It definitely doesn't. There's so much infighting in the vegan community that can be incredibly frustrating to deal with, and there's so much, you know, whataboutisms and more vegan than thou kind of stuff that happens. So whenever a controversial issue like this comes up, whenever people talk about whether or not their pet is vegan in vegan groups, that shit goes off. It is like insane and ridiculous, and it's so intense. I really don't want to deal with any of it. I really hope I don't get any hate for this online, but we shall see. I will update you guys on my stories on Instagram this week if I do receive any comments or any, craziness from people out there. So let's see what happens. But thank you very much for joining us for this week's episode. We don't have a definitive answer here. The only answer we have is the gray area, and we are still undecided about our feelings on it. So,
you know what? Something you might be able to put in the show notes as well, actually. I just noticed, doing a quick Google, that a friend of ours, shout out to Beck Pridham if she might be listening, but one of my former colleagues from The Examiner has written a bit of an explainer, Why Are There Monkeys in the Middle of Launceston City Park, that was just published a few days ago.
Oh, beautiful.
It's part of ACM. I'm not sure if it was... It's in there. It was in the Voices of Real Australia newsletter anyway. Yes.
Yeah, grab me that link and send it to me. Guys, we're going to have a link for that, and we would like to give a shout out to Beck. And if you'd like to find Beck online on Instagram and go follow her, she is...
On there.
On there. We're going to drop her handle in the show notes just as a little shout out, because what a queen. What an amazing queen. I think Beck's vegan, isn't she?
She is, yeah.
Yeah. What about vegan friends down here, guys? All right, she's got an explainer article there about, the monkeys
Gives you a bit
in
of
the park.
background on the monkeys.
Bit of background on that. So we're going to drop that in the show notes, and we will have a few other resources there for you guys to check out. I hope that you have enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you for joining us on the podcast this week. If you are enjoying the podcast and you want to help us out, you can head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a little rating or review. That does really help to push the podcast up there so that more people can check it out and, just spread that non-judgmental vegan message. If you would like us to answer any questions about today's episode, if you have any thoughts on it, please hit us up over on Instagram. We are at May Contain Traces of Soy. And you can also find us on Facebook, but we are not active on there compared with Insta. Okay, thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode, guys. Make sure that you check out the YouTube channel this week as well. I'm not sure which video I'm putting out, but it might be a hair dye video. That's fun. Nothing to do with this week's podcast episode, but it's fun. And we are doing weekly episodes now and weekly videos. So definitely make sure that you subscribe on YouTube and you subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so that you can check out the new episodes as they drop. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you in a week.